All right, so welcome everyone to Maccabee Nation's first interview. I want to introduce today Stuart Wohl. Is that how you pronounce your name, Stuart?
Sure, close enough.
So Stuart is a retired firearms instructor from the New York City Police Department. He spent 5 years studying domestic political militant groups and has worked across a variety of fields related to counterterrorism and crowd control. As a member of the department's disorder control unit, thank you for joining us on Memorial Day, especially.
Yeah, it's a special day, but a pleasure to be here with you, Jason.
Awesome. So I want to jump in. If you could, tell us a little bit about your background and what initially sparked your interest in policing.
I have to say, I remember I had a lieutenant who was very down on the department years after I joined, and I had told him that 9/11 was a reason I had joined the department. It was one of the main motivations for me in joining policing. And he used to say that Osama bin Laden ruined your life because he hated the department so much at that point. He was waiting to retire. But yeah, it was a big motivation. I think a lot of the arc of a lot of people's lives in Gen X here in the United States changed as a result. And I'd add myself to that group.
Yeah, I grew up in New Jersey across the river, and I don't think anyone who was alive then will ever forget that.
Yeah, yeah, and it's particularly poignant on a day like today, and you see what's happened the last 20 some odd years, how far it's gone. And, I see my own kids, and it's just become history to them. But it doesn't mean that it's still not meaningful to those of us that lived through it. It was a very poignant time in my life, and it's definitely a huge motivating factor for me. Serve my country after that.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. Is there something kind of counterintuitive or that you've learned over your years in policing, something that maybe police officers take for granted as common knowledge that the rest of us might not think about?
I think maybe it's just the TV version of policing. Everyone's drawing firearms, everyone's in a shootout, mysteries are solved in an hour. I think, I was kind of surprised myself how much of the time I spent, especially on patrol, just dealing with social friction. That was a big part of it. Disputes between neighbors, disputes at stores, landlord tenant disputes, domestic disputes. The social friction in a huge society, a big place like New York, is just, it's hard to believe, but I think more than chasing bad guys, and catching violent criminals, you spend a lot of your time really just dealing with everyday people and the problems that come up in life. And I actually enjoyed kind of doing that. It's just sort of keeping things moving in society.
Yeah, along those lines, it does seem like a really difficult time to be a police officer nowadays in terms of how public sentiment kind of has shifted around policing. What are your thoughts on that? And would you recommend for your own kids or a family friend to go into policing today?
Well, I just want to say, like, first of all, it was never an easy. It's always had its set of difficulties, and it's definitely hard right now for a lot of people. I don't have any regrets about the department, about policing, law enforcement as a profession. I would do it again, and I see my son's a little interested in it. It's possible that may be something he pursues down the road, but maybe you just, if you're a job seeker or you're considering it, you have to be a little more careful of the department you're joining, the jurisdiction you're going to be working in. You want to be someplace that where the politicians, the executives of your agency, the people at large in that community are generally supportive of you, because it's become more of a zero defects mentality in policing, that you have to do all these difficult things, you have to assume all this risk, and every decision you make is going to be second guessed. It's on video now, and you have to understand the people involved in doing this are human beings, and yet we're under a tremendous amount of scrutiny. So where you decide to do the professional law enforcement, I think, is even more critical than it was 20 something years ago when I started.
Yeah. And where does your can you tell us a little bit more about your background and your connection with Judaism? What has kind of shaped that identity, and are there a lot of Jewish police officers? What's that kind of community look like?
Um, I grew up Jewish in New York City with all of the good and bad that comes from that, in the diaspora. But Jewish education to me was, there was no separation like there seems to be sometimes now between Judaism and Zionism. To me, the two of them, I don't accept these kind of attempts by people outside the community to separate the two. Uh, to me, growing up, they were basically one and the same. One fed into the other. They were both a part of my growing up, my makeup. But yeah, there's a vibrant Jewish policing community. It's not talked about very often, but in the department, they have a fraternal society. I was a member for like a year or so, and just the point I was in my life, I just didn't really have the time to dedicate to it. But they're out there, and as we speak, it's like anything else in America. If you want to be a part of it, it's open to you. If you're qualified and you want to take the chance and do it, you know, go for it.
Awesome. And but before we jump into kind of talking about gun safety, I want to talk about more your experience in the disorder and control unit, because obviously the protests going on, especially at Columbia and other universities, not just in the Northeast but around the country, is a real hot topic right now. Can you speak a little bit about that experience, and if you were to give advice to someone, maybe a Jewish person who wanted to counter protests, what are some ways that they could do that more safely?
It's a difficult time. We've seen right now like a resurgence of some of the left-wing groups we've seen in New York over the past 10, 15 years attach themselves to, the Palestinian cause. And these groups are, they're well-funded, they're organized, they have experience in street protests. They basically there's a lot more of the iceberg under the water than people see. But you have to be careful. Some of these groups have been known to be violent at times, to be disruptive. We certainly see that, to be disorderly. Uh, you need to be careful when you go to a protest. You need to think through where you're going to be, and enjoy your First Amendment rights, but I wouldn't recommend trying to forcefully engage with people in a situation where you might be outnumbered, where there might not be enough officers to protect people engaged in peaceful protest. You have to survey the situation where you're at, and understand who you're dealing with.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And traditionally, when it comes to owning firearms, a lot of American Jews, especially, and probably similar in Europe, have kind of been against having guns in the home and things like that. Can you tell us more about your stance on that, and maybe some reasons why it could be beneficial for more Jews around the world to own firearms?
I think it's a huge mistake not taking advantage of our rights, especially here in America. As full-bodied citizens, taking on the rights and responsibilities to protect themselves. I understand more than most people that the police can't be everywhere at all times, and in a situation where crime has certainly risen in a lot of parts of the country since COVID. Just on a personal safety level, dealing with violent crime, it'd be wise to take advantage of the opportunity that the country affords us to protect ourselves. And given the other situation going on with the Jewish community in particular, it's even more important for the Jewish community, Jewish individuals, to take advantage of the Second Amendment in this country.
Yeah. And a lot of people that I speak to who might be on the left but also on the right are thinking about maybe buying a gun for the first time. They've never thought about it in their life. Where would you recommend that they even start thinking about the steps that they need to take to own a firearm?
Well, the first place to start is with your local laws. The firearms ownership in the United States is like kind of a patchwork quilt of rules, regulations, things you can own, things you can't own, where you can possess a firearm, whether it's in and out of a home or a business. There's different types of permits. And there's basically, let's be honest, there's a lot of people going out of their way to make it difficult for people to take advantage of their Second Amendment rights. And there's organizations that have been fighting this out of court for decades. It's a constantly changing area. And so you have to start with what your local laws and regulations are to understand what capabilities you can possess. And you also have to understand your own situation. What are you looking for a firearm to do for you? Do you live in a rural community, an urban one? Are you looking into getting a concealed carry permit to carry a firearm with you? Or is it something strictly for your home or business? You have to start with your local laws and with your own needs.
And what are some, if you were to list 3 to 5 kind of tenets of gun safety, can you tell people a little bit more about how they can own a weapon safely?
Well, the starting point for firearm safety is, the 4 universal rules of gun safety. Always treat a firearm as being loaded. Even if you're sure you've cleared it, always treat it that way. Always point your firearm in a safe direction. Like imagine there's a laser beam coming out of the barrel. It's going to burn anything that the muzzle is pointing at. You learn safer handling by thinking that, always being conscious of where your muzzle's being pointed. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. Okay, you avoid any kind of accidental discharge. And also you have to know what your target is and what's around and behind it. If you fire a firearm and the round misses its intended target, what's behind that? What's near it? Always be conscious of the environment that you're in. You're handling the firearm. So those rules developed by Colonel Jeff Cooper, decades ago, is really like the basic starting point for firearm safety. And obviously, it's a world unto itself, but that's really a great starting point for people to understand.
What about for people who may have kids in the home, extra precautions that they should take if they have, curious critters roaming around the house?
Well, I mean, a biometric safe, say for a handgun, is a good idea. Something that would basically unlock with your fingerprints, but a place to safely store firearms away from children is absolutely critical for any situation like that. You should also have, a designated space for cleaning, maintaining a firearm. Your ammunition should be kept separate from that area away. It should, kids should also be excluded from that area when you're doing that kind of work. You need to minimize your distractions. If you have small children like I do, they just come in, at the least expected time sometimes because they want to be around their father, their mother, and you want to be focused on what you're doing. If you're maintaining a firearm, you want to minimize those distractions to handle those things. Maybe when the kids aren't around or when they're in bed. And of course, one of the biggest things you got to do is, you cannot be involved with alcohol or drugs while doing anything with a firearm. It just leads to mistakes and should be avoided at all costs.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Um,
And some of these, Jason, some the rules, in certain jurisdictions now are mandating safe storage for firearms, basically like some kind of a lock container. But I think, even if you're in a jurisdiction where that's not mandated, it's a really important consideration.
and what age do you think? I know some people talk about that if you're going to have them in the home, that at a certain age, children should understand about gun safety, and what age is appropriate to start introducing them to some of these concepts.
I know, I started with my own children pretty young. I think it depends on the child and the situation, how comfortable you are. I wanted at some point to demystify firearms with my children, basically say, look, I didn't want it to be the forbidden fruit that they were always trying to get after. So, I took first my son when he reached, he was probably somewhere between 6, 7 years old. And I just showed him the firearm unloaded, made sure that he could see what it was, what the component pieces were, sort of some of the basics, just try to explain to him how it worked. But, you know, it's a tool. It's a very dangerous one, but at some point, depending on the child, you have to explain it to them so it doesn't become something that they're looking for you to make a mistake about, where they can get a hold of it. You have to, kind of find that balance. And I think that that's up to the individual parent and really the maturity level of the child involved.
Thank you for that. Can you talk a little bit more about mental health and gun ownership? Are there certain people that should not own firearms, or certain personality types maybe that you would recommend, that the benefits don't outweigh the risks?
I think, you need to have a stable mind. And I think people, prone to fits of anger, people have a hard time controlling their temper, may not be as well suited as other people for firearms. If you suffer from depression, I'm not a psychiatrist, but some kind of diagnosed mental disorder, you should not have a firearm. Um, you know, there's risks of hurting other people or hurting yourself. We hear about this all the time. And, if you're going through difficult times, some people, firearms owners, will, leave their firearms with other people, friends, even with a law enforcement agency. They say, like, listen, I'm just not capable of dealing with this right now. But if you have the kind of personality where you're prone to fits of anger and control, have a hard time controlling your temper, maybe it's not something for you.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want people to know about either gun safety, training, or anything that you want people who subscribe to this channel to know?
I look at it as a process. You called me an expert at one point. We were discussing things before the show and before the interview. And I hate to call myself an expert in anything. Like, I look at it as we're all on a journey. I know more than I used to know. I don't know as much as I will hopefully know down the road. And to me, firearm safety and training, it's a process. It's a world unto itself. And the last thing I would like, is for someone to take like a basic concealed carry or a home ownership course, get a license or whatever registration is needed in their area, buy a firearm and a box of ammunition and throw it in a drawer and call it done. To me, it's a process. It's something that you should be trying to learn more about because of the just how difficult it is. Like, imagine buying a vehicle that you've never driven before, then leaving it in your driveway, and if you ever need it, it'll all of a sudden you'll be in that vehicle driving in the Indy 500. It'll be, a very highly stressful, serious situation. So to me, you don't get involved with something like that and then just take a simple class and call it done. It should be a process that where you're always trying to learn more, train more, understand the law more, the use of force rules in your jurisdiction, understand the use of the firearm itself, how to use it effectively, understand how to maintain it. It's an ongoing process, and you should, commit yourself. That to me is part of being a truly responsible gun owner.
I love that. I love thinking about it as a process. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, everyone, for being able to tune in to Maccabee Nation, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Jason.